Reading from Galatians chapter 5, verses 1 to 15. It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery. Mark my words. I, Paul, tell you that if you let yourselves be circumcised, Christ will be of no value to you at all. Again, I declare to every man who lets himself be circumcised that he is required to obey the whole law. You who are trying to be justified by law have been alienated from Christ. You have fallen away from grace. But by faith we eagerly await, through the Spirit, the righteousness for which we hope. For in Christ Jesus, neither circumcision nor uncircumcision has any value. The only thing that counts is faith, expressing itself through love. You were running a good race. Who cut in on you and kept you from obeying the truth? That kind of persuasion does not come from the one who calls you. A little yeast works through the whole batch of dough. I am confident in the Lord that you will take no other view. The one who is throwing you into confusion will pay the penalty, whoever he might be. Brothers, if I am still preaching circumcision, why am I still being persecuted? In that case, the offence of the cross has been abolished. As for those agitators, I wish they would go the whole way and emasculate themselves. You, my brothers, were called to be free, but do not use your freedom to indulge the sinful nature. Rather, serve one another in love. The entire law is summed up in a single command: love your neighbour as yourself. If you keep on biting and devouring each other, watch out, or you will be destroyed by each other. The second reading this morning is from 1 Corinthians chapter 9, reading from verses 19 to 23. Though I am free and belong to no man, I make myself a slave to everyone, to win as many as possible. To the Jews, I became like a Jew, to win the Jews. For those under the law, I became like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, so as to win those under the law. To those not having the law, I became like one not having the law, though I am not free from God's law, but am under Christ's law, so as to win those not having the law. To the weak, I became weak to win the weak. I have become all things to all men, so that by all possible means I might save some. I do all this for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessings. There can be no triumph without loss, no victory without suffering, no freedom without sacrifice. The tagline for The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. But it could so easily have been something that we might read within our scriptures. It could so easily, I think, be the tagline for the gospel, the story that enables each one of us to become children of God, gifted freedom from our past and from the consequences of sin and wrong that results in death, from insecurity and lovelessness, all through faith and trust in Jesus Christ, his life, his death and his resurrection. No triumph without loss, no victory without suffering, no freedom without sacrifice. Freedom is never free. I mean, we know this. We're called to remember it every November Remembrance Day. Our freedom today can be seen as the result of wars in which thousands lost their lives. Our freedom today to buy cheap clothing costs youngsters and those trapped in poverty a decent wage for their work. Our freedom to have quality food at the cheapest prices cost farmers a decent price for their products. Make no doubt about it, the freedom that we enjoy, often without giving it a second thought, is never free, and it cannot exist without boundaries. Freedom and discipline, although quite often seen as mutually exclusive, are in fact not so. True freedom comes through discipline. The athlete is only really free to run well and perform brilliantly through disciplined training. Dancers only have the freedom to dance with effortless grace because of the disciplined practice. And the same can be said of musicians and artists, writers and scientists. The freedom with which they excel and push the boundaries of creativity and research and progress only comes from the discipline of hard work, heartache, persistence, and the meticulous following of instructions. Freedom is not free, and it comes with responsibilities as well. It is for freedom that Christ has set you free, says Paul. Stand firm and do not let yourselves be burdened again with a yoke of slavery. We have to decide what we will do with our freedom in Christ. What are you doing with your freedom? This is really what Paul is asking the Galatians here. Are you using your freedom well, or are you abusing your freedom? And it would seem to me that there are a couple of ways in which our freedom can be abused that Paul highlights here. Firstly, turning our freedom into license is a way in which we abuse our freedom. It was Billy Connolly who talked about how daft it was that surfers were complaining about shark attacks off the coasts of Australia. If we use our freedom to enter the oceans of this world, the habitats and environments of these huge and dangerous creatures, why complain when they attack us? Billy says if you happen to be about your own business, queuing in the post office, and a great white shark sneaks up behind you and takes a bite out of your bum, then you have ample room to complain. But when you decide to use your freedom to enter into their habitat, aware of the dangers, how can you complain when you get bitten? We have this inbuilt desire, it would seem, for curiosity, to see just how far we can push boundaries and get away with it. We do similar things with God as well. How long can we continue to ignore this habit and get away with it? How long can we live in denial of this thing and get away with it? Paul talks in verse 13 about not using your freedom to indulge your sinful nature, to carry on as you were, to carry on satisfying your need for security and love and acceptance and forgiveness by looking for it in things that promise much but deliver little. Relationships, sex, addictions, work, promotions, consumerism, the list could go on. When we do this, our freedom degenerates into a license to try anything because, hey, you know what? Jesus forgives you, so it really doesn't matter. But what Paul makes clear is this. We abuse our God-given freedom when we turn it into a license to do just what we want, when we want, how we want. How are you using your freedom? We also, it would seem, abuse our freedom when we turn it into legalism. In verse 15, Paul gives this very adequate flavour to the scene within the Galatian churches that appear to have been on the brink of civil war over this saved by observing the law or saved through faith in Jesus issue. Personal attacks on individuals were making this church look like sharks ready for the kill. If you keep on biting and devouring each other, he says, watch out, or you will be destroyed by each other. People were trying to force their beliefs and customs onto others, literally stealing their freedom. And it's easily done. We build a box of just what we think a Christian should be like, what they look like, dress like, sound like, how they express their worship and faith, what theological line they might take on issues. And when people do not exactly fit that box, we reject them. Maybe not outrightly, but their views, their validity and rights to be a part of who we are become much easier to dismiss because we sense that we have the superior understanding and view of what is right. And isn't this something of what we've seen happening all around and about us in our world as well as at times within our churches? And when we do this, we are in effect biting and devouring one another like animals. Legalism tears people down. And when the crusade of self-righteousness reaches its ultimate end, community is decimated and finally annihilated. We're all in this together unless you don't agree with me. one of the lines with which Grace and Perry decorated a ceramic work to mark our present times. What Paul makes clear here is that you abuse your freedom when you turn it into a license to do whatever you want, and also when you turn it into legalism, holding others in contempt because they disagree with you or because they're just not like you. Can I suggest to you then that the culture in which we live has normalised the abuse of freedom, and we need to wake up to this and realise that the ways in which Paul goes on to suggest we use our freedom will not seem easy because they are countercultural. How are you using your freedom? Paul suggests a couple of ways in which we should be making use of this gospel freedom that is given to us in the person of Jesus. Firstly, through serving others, Paul says. And then when he says serving one another, he's using here a word that's normally employed in the context of slavery. This is what we heard in the reading from 1 Corinthians 9. Though I am free and belong to no one, I have made myself a slave to everyone to win as many as possible. The irony of true freedom is to be found in serving. The person set free from slavery to the law and slavery to self-will finds true freedom as a servant of Jesus Christ and an eager and willing servant of the community of believers. So how might things be different if our focus as part of Broadway Baptist Church and how we could best serve each other on our journeys to become more like Jesus? Oh no, I've done that wrong as well. How might things be different if our focus as part of Broadway Baptist Church was how we could best serve each other on our journeys to become more like Jesus, doing what Jesus did in the way that Jesus did things? That we decided on what local church we committed ourselves to, not by asking what's the church going to do for me, but what we could do for the church. How we could serve one another to become those truly living lives worth imitating on the path to becoming like Jesus. And I wonder what impact might this have on our community. How are you using your freedom in this kind of service? But Paul also suggests that our freedom can be used in loving one another. Paul's made it clear in verse 6 of this part of Galatians that faith expresses itself through love. And here again, it would seem that freedom, just like faith, is discovered and rests upon love. The entire law is summed up in this single command: love your neighbour as yourselves. How are you doing at loving your neighbour? At loving the people around you, even the ones you struggle with and maybe you don't like? You know, it's unfortunate, isn't it, that most people will think about Christianity and will think about being a Christian as all about having to live within the boundaries of all the you shall nots that a distant God is said to have imposed upon people. That it's something that takes every freedom away. But the reality is, of course, that God gives to us in Jesus true freedom. A freedom that enables us to live life and to live life to the full. That's gospel freedom. Do you know this freedom? And if you do, what are you doing with it? Are you using it or are you abusing it? And can you begin to see how the ways in which you choose to use your freedom sets you apart and could help people within our community to encounter the truth about Jesus, of who he is for them today? Will you use it to love and to serve and to build others up? Or will you use it as a license to sin or to destroy others? Think about how you use your freedom in Christ, says Paul, because it is for freedom that Christ has set you free.